Who's your commander?
Good luck.
Equip.
Move to combat. Resolves.
Right.
Now, before you attack
Does
me,
anyone have an answer?
well played.
Good game.
Hello everyone, my name is DJ. This is the Jumbo Commander YouTube channel, and this whole week we're talking about enchantments. And so right now I'm going to be talking to you about the 5 best enchantments. They will make any commander deck out there better just by their presence. Doesn't matter what you're doing. And hopefully along the way, we'll learn a little bit more about what makes an enchantment such a staple for our format. Let's start off with the black enchantment I've chosen, and that's Blood Chief Ascension. 1 black for an enchantment. At the beginning of each end step, if an opponent lost 2 or more life this turn, you may put a quest counter on Blood Chief Ascension. Damage causes loss of life. Whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, if Blood Chief Ascension has 3 or more quest counters on it, you may have that player lose 2 life. If you do, you gain 2 life. So, Blood Chief's Ascension in the whole Ascension cycle has this hoop you have to jump through. You have to get these quest counters on it and then they turn on. But in multiplayer formats like Commander, they turn on much faster because there's so many more end steps and so many more opportunities for our opponents to just lose 2 life. That's like shocking in a shockland too, so it's pretty easy. So we can assume that Blood Chief Ascension is going to get turned on quickly. So this effect. If a card goes into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, you have to drain them for 2. So let's take the average case scenario of Blood Chief Ascension, a board wipe. Okay, a board wipe happens. Everyone has between 3 and 5 creatures. This is a very boring, normal game of Commander. Blood Chief Ascension will deal 12 damage and you'll gain 12 life. That's kind of crazy for a single black mana. And that's not even touching on the other use case scenarios. Imagine if someone Wheel of Fortunes. Everyone's discarding their hand. That's so many cards going into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere. That's crazy. I mean, even imagine milling. Like you mill someone and Blood Chief Ascension will trigger. There's a lot of decks out there that mill themselves or throw things into the graveyard or sacrifice their board, so Blood Chief Ascension punishes all of them. So this card can deal a lot of damage. We've come to that conclusion. What makes this card good and good in every deck? I mean, because it sees a lot of play in mill decks and discard decks and things like that, but why should anyone be able to be playing Blood Chief Ascension? Well, if you have a deck that's designed to pressure your opponent's life total, Blood Chief Ascension is great because suddenly people are put in this weird situation of, well, I can't even block. If I start having creatures die, then Blood Chief Ascension will trigger too. And so it ends up really pressuring them in a different way than the traditional combat on the battlefield kind of way. And that's interesting. Of course, on the other end of the spectrum, if you're playing a more controlling deck, then this can deal a lot of damage, but then again, gain you a lot of life. So again, your own board wipes become weaponized. You clear the board so that you can stay alive longer, but in doing so, you've dealt a lot of damage and you've gained yourself a lot of life. So Blood Chief Ascension gives you a lot more staying power in the game. So I invite you, look at your commander deck that plays black and see if Blood Chief Ascension would actually fit the role that you want it to. Let's go on to the next color, and that's green. And I want to talk about a staple. It's Wild Growth. Ramp is so key in Commander because Magic is a resource-based game. People that usually spend the most resources, mana on relevant cards, usually do the best in this game. And so having access to more resources sooner and having access to an additional mana on every single subsequent turn means that oftentimes you're using more things, you're using more mana, you're deploying more stuff than your opponents. And of course, Commander's a long enough game, multiplayer, 40 life, all that stuff, that almost always you'll have the ability to use the ramp that you're deploying, especially if you deploy it early. Wild Growth is also great because it's resilient. It doesn't get caught up in artifact board wipes. I've been Vandal Blasted to oblivion enough times to be wary of that. It also doesn't get sucked up with other board wipes, like your Llanowar Elves, your Elvish Mystic. And so Wild Growth ends up being one of the safer forms of ramp out there. Next up, we have Land Tax. 1 white mana for an enchantment at the beginning of your upkeep. If an opponent controls more lands than you, you may search your library for up to 3 basic land cards, reveal them, put them into your hand, then shuffle. So when evaluating this card, we have to figure out how often it's going to trigger. All the time. It's going to trigger all the time, and that's okay. If it's ever not triggering, it means that you're on par with your opponents when it comes to lands. And then as a white deck, you're just feeling great. You know, you can afford to have a land tax not doing anything on the battlefield. But one thing to keep in mind is that this doesn't have to trigger multiple times for this to still be excellent. It can just trigger once, drawing you 3 cards, and that's an Ancestral Recall. Granted, that's a very unlucky Ancestral Recall because it's drawn you 3 lands. The thing is though, lands are still cards. They are still useful, you still need them, and so drawing them is still good. And the fact that land tax can get you 3 or 6 or 9, it's just insane. There are also things that we can do in white that use these excess lands in our hand. Some of the things we can do is we can just put them on the battlefield with like an Archaeomancer's Map or a Walking Atlas, something like that. Of course, we can also trade them in for other card draw, something like a Scroll Rack effect. Scroll Rack works great. It's a classic combination of putting all those lands back on top, and then land tax triggers again before your draw phase, shuffling those all away. People in Commander are obsessed with ramp, and you should be. It's very good. I just explained that in the Wild Growth section earlier. But if you're ever missing your land drop, you've kind of sabotaged all of the ramp that you've put into your deck. So hitting your land drops, especially in decks that struggle with ramp, is so important. And so if you can play a card that can make sure you reliably hit your land drops, that's worthwhile. Land tax is a worthwhile inclusion in your white commander decks. In red, I'd like to introduce you to Flame Blitz. It's a single red for an enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, Flame Blitz deals 5 damage to each planeswalker. It also has cycling too, so for 2 mana you can discard this and draw a card. To evaluate Flame Blitz, let's look at all of the different scenarios in which we'd use it. Okay, so there's a planeswalker on the battlefield. You pay a single red mana, it deals 5 damage to it and kills it. That's amazing. We traded a card for their planeswalker. Thumbs up. Of course, there's added benefit too, because it doesn't just kill the first planeswalker, it kills every subsequent planeswalker. I mean, people will play a planeswalker, they'll get a single activation, and then at the end of your turn, Flame Blitz will trigger again, taking out that planeswalker. So that's pretty good too, clearing the battlefield of that pesky card type. But of course, the first time you put it down, it might not even get 1 planeswalker. It might get 2 or 3 or 4 planeswalkers. This might shut down an entire deck. This could prevent your opponents from playing an entire card type. It's insane. But of course, it's narrow. You know, planeswalkers are not the most popular card type out there. You know, some people only run a handful in every deck, and you might not ever see them in a game of Commander. Just cycle it away. Just cycle it away. You have something that functions at a really, really high level, although it is undeniably narrow. But then, if you have the ability to cycle it away and get something else, oh my gosh, this card is so good. And our 5th card, the last one I'm going to talk about today, is in blue. It's Search for His Kano. Search for His Kano is 1 and a blue for a legendary enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. You may put it into your graveyard. Then if you have 7 or more cards in your graveyard, you may transform Search for His Kano. His Kano, the Sunken Ruin, is the legendary land on the other side. Tap, add a blue mana to your mana pool. Simple land. It's got another ability though. 2 and a blue, tap, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal a non-creature, non-land card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. Let's just look at the front side right now, just this enchantment side. 1 and a blue lets you just kind of scry a little bit, surveil the top card of your library every single turn. That's pretty good. If you just get rid of a couple cards that you didn't want to draw, then Search for His Kano is replacing itself. They say like 2 or 3 scries kind of equates to drawing a card. And so Search for His Kano doesn't have to be on the battlefield for very long before it finds a good replacement effect. But this could quite possibly be the best ramp in blue. Now, blue usually relies on artifacts to provide ramp, but this actually is an enchantment for 2 mana that gets a land onto the battlefield. It does have a significant hoop. You're not going to be able to easily get 7 cards in, but it's only going to take a couple of turns with you normally playing your commander deck before this flips over into an island. If this was just an island, that would be great. hey, a little bit of card selection, maybe it replaces itself by letting me get to the cards that I need, and then boom, transforms into a land. I've ramped a little bit, play that in every blue deck. But it's got extra synergy with top deck manipulation, and it's got this activated ability, which is amazing in the late game. You're like, the only thing I need is a board wipe right now. Well, you got one more tool to get 4 cards deeper to find it. You have nothing to do. Well, as Kanto the Sunken Ruin can get you closer to action. I mean, these kinds of effects are what keep you in Commander games. They're incredibly powerful, and I think you should take a look at Search for His Kano for your blue decks. Now, I know not all of these are groundbreaking cards that you've never heard of. I think many of you would be like, yeah, I know that's a good card. But hopefully the context helps you understand why these are not niche cards that belong in very specific decks. Of course, I could be wrong. I had a hard time choosing these 5, so let me know your favorites in the comments down below. I want to thank Cool Stuff Inc. You can pick up so many of these great cards from Cool Stuff Inc. And when you do, make sure you use the coupon code JUMBO5 to save 5% off your order. I also want to thank my patrons. They're amazing and they support me every single day. Thank you, patrons. And thank you for watching. Make sure to subscribe so that you can see all of the enchantment action all week long. All right, everyone. Bye.